Hello friends. Today we are going to discuss about legalization of cannabis. I am Dr. Suresh Badadmat, Professor of Psychiatry, working at National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore. In this video, I'll be discussing about cannabis. What is the legal position of cannabis use? Further, what are the evidence against and for with regard to legalization of cannabis? Before we move further, we need to be clear about the concept of legalization. What do you mean by cannabis legalization? Is it making available for medicinal and scientific research purposes? Or else, is it for recreational use? Similar to alcohol and nicotine, it should be available everywhere? Or else, should we decriminalize the cannabis use so that the people seek treatment? In this regard, what does the NDPS Act 1985 says about this? And what should be as an amendment considering the scientific evidence today? This video is based upon an important publication titled as Legalization of Recreational Cannabis Use. Is India ready for it? This is the article published in Indian Journal of Social Psychiatry by few of my colleagues and myself. Let's discuss about cannabis. If you look at the definition of cannabis as per the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substance Act 1985, under the definition, the cannabis means it is also called as hemp. Either it is charas, ganja, and any mixture. Now let's understand charas. That is, the separated resin in whatsoever form, whether crude or purified, obtained from the cannabis plant and also includes concentrated preparation and resin known as hashish oil or liquid hashish. Now, let's understand about the ganja. That is the flowering or fruiting tops of the cannabis plant. The ganja excludes the seeds and leaves when not accompanied by the tops. That means the leaves and seeds of the cannabis are excluded by the definition of cannabis, by whatever name they may be designated, or by local names. Further, any mixture with or without any neutral material of any of the above forms of cannabis or any drink prepared therefrom. So, my dear friends, you need to understand the definition of cannabis excludes seeds and leaves. If you look at this diagram, it clearly shows that the cannabis is in the form of leaves, and you can see the flower when it is cut and dried. It similar. You can see the flowering tops. So these are the usually utilized in cannabis. Cannabis has two important species. One is cannabis sativa and cannabis indica, and the other one is a hybrid. Invariably, the cannabis plant's sativa grows up to 16 feet, which is longer, thinner, and light color. Flowering time is around 10 to 16 weeks. Sativa causes head high, energetic, creativity, social ability, euphoric, and alertness. Invariably, this sativa has THC dominant. That means tetrahydrocannabinoid will be there in this in predominant way. If you look at the cannabis indica, the plant is 6 feet, wide, broad, deep colored. Flowering takes 6 to 8 weeks. It causes body high, relaxing, calm. Sometimes it induces sleep, induces appetite, pain relief. Here, cannabinoid is the dominant version. Cannabis also impacts various parts of the cognitive function. It may be pain and sensory perception may be altered, emotions are altered. It even controls the movements, memory, appetite regulation, neurogenesis, and immunity. It also controls heart, liver, kidney, small intestine, uterus, and testes. That means cannabis has impact across the body. It may be positive and negative. However, the medicinal use of cannabis has found to be useful in various movement disorders such as Parkinsonism. Sometimes it has been found to be very helpful cancer related, vomiting, pain. Further, it is also used for dysphoric effect of chemotherapy in glaucoma, pain with regard to arthritis. It has been found to be helpful in anxiety and preliminary reports in hepatitis C. Further, it also been used for epileptic seizures. Weight control is the one they say, Crohn's disease, and at time, asthma. With regard to PTSD, it is still in preliminary stages. However, it has been both used in allopathy and Ayurveda. Although there are uses of cannabis is there for medicinal purposes, but is it safe to be made available in a recreational purposes has to be answered. Now let's look into the what does the NDPS Act of 1985 talk about cannabis users. If you look at the NDPS Act, it came into existence for controlling and regulating the operation relating to narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances, and also to implement the provisions of the International Convention on Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances. The broader aim of this legislation is to protect the people of India from the risks and harms associated with the narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. Under the NDPS Act, it is very clear the person who manufactures or he grows, who transfers, who transports, who traffics, who uses are all considered as criminal, and it is a criminal offense. That means from manufacturing to the consumption, invariably without permission or license, if it is done, they will be considered as criminals and they are punished. However, in 2001, there was an amendment. Here, the law tried to differentiate between the commercial use purposes and personal use purposes. That means if a person is carrying a small quantity for personal use, then the punishment is not severe. If a person is carrying it for commercial, that is for selling, is a trafficker, then that person will be punished with huge fine and also imprisonment for longer duration. Further, in 2014, there was an amendment and a phrase was added. It talked about medicinal use of narcotics to ensure the availability of narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances for medical and scientific uses. A category of essential narcotic drugs was introduced in 2014. That means NDPS Act does not restrict medicinal and research purposes. Now, we will look into what are the legal issues which has generated. There was a case with regard to Prashant Sharma versus Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Here, Mr. Prashant Verma approached the Delhi High Court seeking direction to legalize cannabis for medicinal use. Here, the High Court clearly said that it can only be done by bringing proper enactment or amendment under the NDPS Act. The Delhi High Court said that we are not inclined to grant the prior what the petitioner is seeking. Further, it asked the petitioner to pay a fine of 10,000 rupees to the Bar Association Library Fund. If you closely look into the NDPS Act of 1985, Section 4 is very clear, which clearly says central government to take measures for preventing and combating abuse of illicit traffic in narcotic drugs. Here, it clearly says that for ensuring medicinal and scientific use, it will allow. Further, if you look at the section 7A, the National Fund for Control of Drug Abuse, here that fund will be utilized for supplying drugs to addicts where such supply is for medical necessity. For example, if your opioid addict is there, the person who is suffering from opioid addiction or dependence, buprenorphine can be used or methadone can be used, and that supply will come from the national fund. That's what the legislation says. That means the NDPS Act does not prohibit for medicinal and scientific research purposes. But however, it criminalizes the person who using the drugs, both cannabis or any other drug. If you look at the NDPS Act section 27, it clearly says punishment for consumption of any narcotic drugs or psychotropic substances. Whoever consumes any narcotic drugs or psychotropic substance shall be punishable if the substance consumed is cocaine, morphine, diacetylmorphine, or any other narcotic drugs or any other psychotropic substance as may be notified, shall be punished with a rigorous imprisonment of a term which may be extended to 1 year or with fine of 20,000 rupees or both. Which substance consumed is other than those which is mentioned above, they will be punished with an imprisonment of a term which may extend to 6 months or with fine or both. That means, under the NDPS Act, the people who use these drugs or substances, including cannabis, is a punishable offense. However, Section 64A grants immunity from prosecution to addicts volunteering for treatment. That means Section 64A clearly says any drug user who is charged with an offense punishable under the Section 27, that means who is a user and he carries only small quantity. In such a case or a scenario, who voluntarily seeks treatment for addiction, and they will not be liable for punishment or prosecution under this Section 27. But however, it should be very clear, they will be carried only small quantity. If he is found to be carrying large quantities, Section 27 under will not be applicable and Section 64A will not be applicable. But however, there has been a stricture which has been placed here. That means the said immunity for the drug addict from prosecution may be withdrawn if the addict does not undergo complete treatment of de-addiction. Here, the question of complete de-addiction is very difficult to understand. Invariably, the cannabis or the drug abuse or use is a chronic condition, remitting, lapsing, relapsing condition. It does not be completely cured by just one admission. That means here the NDPS Act indirectly says that means he should be completely cured by de-addiction treatment. If it does not, then Section 64A becomes nullified. This is the biggest critique of this legislation. Scientific evidence is very clear. It is not a curable condition, it is a chronic condition. Based upon the medical evidence, we need to amend this legislation with regard to addiction. That means we need to facilitate treatment. However, the punishment should be decriminalized. Why? The simple reason is any person who is addicted or dependent on drugs or cannabis, they are looked upon as criminals, junkies, addicts. The society stigmatizes them. Service providers are also in dilemma, should I provide treatment or not? Since it is criminalizing and punishing them, even the person who is dependent on drugs finds it difficult to seek help. Hence, they don't take treatment. Many a time, sudden intoxication causes sudden death. Police may use this power to harass these people with drug addiction for money. Many a time, they threaten them. The Section 64A should be realistic in this regard. We need to decriminalize the drug use. We need to facilitate treatment. We need to understand it is a chronic, remitting, relapsing condition. For these purposes, the law should facilitate treatment, help them to recover, and bring them to the mainstream. We should not criminalize them, put them in the prison without giving any treatment. Once you put them in the prison and they do not become skilled, invariably many drugs are available even inside the prison. It is across the world. And when they come out, they again go back to substance use. We need to engage them meaningfully, and we need to have an inclusive policy. We need to understand it is a medical illness rather than calling that our drug addicts. Hence, it is high time we need to decriminalize the drug use. The banning strategy is not worked in any world or in any part of the country. And hence, we need to be realistic. We need to think of risk reduction strategies rather than complete prohibition. This culture of banning should stop. We are a society from the where we need to educate them, engage them, and provide treatment. Now, the important question: should the cannabis be legalized for recreational use? That means cannabis should be available like alcohol and nicotine in every corner of the society. That is the question I'm going to answer. If you look at the countries like US and Canada, they have come up with a legislation for recreational use of cannabis. If you look at the Canadian Act with regard to cannabis, the main objective of this legislation is to protect the health of the young person by restricting their access to cannabis, that is, especially below 18 years. To minimize the inducement of cannabis to the youngsters, allow the legal production of cannabis to replace the illicit or illegal market, deter the illicit cannabis production and sale by appropriate sanction and enforcement, reduce the burden that dealing with cannabis offenses imposed on criminal justice system, enable cannabis users to have quality controlled supply of cannabis, increase the public awareness of the health risk of using cannabis. Under this various objectives, cannabis recreational use was legalized. However, we will look into its impact in the next few slides. The recreational use of cannabis, if it is made available, it will be available in the parties, it will be available in the society, it will be available in every part of the country. Should it be done? Now the question is, how does it legalize it? The government can allow every citizen to grow and to sell cannabis. Further, it can also issue license to grow and also permit few of the people to take license to sell it, just like alcohol. Or else government can grow cannabis by themselves and sell from the government outlets. Or else government can give certain NGOs and societies to grow and sell. There are various models of legalizing recreational use of cannabis. Now, based upon various ways, should the government allow everyone, or else regulate it, or else ban it? There was an important case law, Aditya versus Department of Health and Family Welfare in 2015. Here, Mr. Aditya filed a PIL under Article 226 of the Constitution of India. He is an advocate. He had asked under RTI to the Medical Council of Research, that is ICMR, and he also asked under the RTI whether medicinal or scientific reasons for how the consumption of cannabis in any form is harmful to humans, and what is the basis of law prohibiting cannabis under the NDPS Act was the question he has asked. This RTI question was asked to ICMR, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Legislative Department of the Law Ministry, Law Commission, Central Bureau of Narcotics, New Delhi. And he tried to get the information under RTI from these various departments. And then finally, he filed the PIL in front of the two bench judges. And the two bench judges very clearly said that we are afraid that this court, while exercising its writ jurisdiction under the Article 226 of the Constitution of India, cannot grant the relief the way the advocate Aditya was asking. Apart from that, the petitioner has produced certain technical data regarding the use and effect of cannabis. We are afraid that we are not experts in this field. The petitioner can raise this issue in the parliament. And further, there was another important case which is still pending in the Delhi High Court. That is, Great Legalization Movement Trust versus Union of India with regard to legalization of recreational use of cannabis. Now, let's look into the data. What does the cannabis recreational use can cause? That is based upon public health and safety. Legalizing cannabis for recreational use allows for regulation and quality control, ensuring that access to this product is known potency and purity. This is one of the argument is done by the people who support recreational legalization. Further, this can reduce the contaminated drugs or substance available in the market. This minimizes the adverse health effect. In fact, various studies have said that legalization allowed the potent drugs to be available in the market. Rather than controlling the quality became more and more potent because the simple reason is if you allow for commercial, recreational purposes, everyone will compete to provide high quality, high potent cannabis. That means invariably the government will not be able to regulate the quality and it will be available to everyone. Further, legalization can lead to better harm reduction strategies. That means if you legalize it, the people will think that we are not junkies, we are not addicts, they will come for treatment. But however, please understand, by legalizing it, you are removing the stigma. Yes, it is good, but however, the people will think that it is not addiction substance. People will use it and they may refuse to take treatment. So, invariably, it may backfire. Further, access to legal cannabis may reduce the use of more dangerous substance as well as limit the exposure to criminal elements associated with the illegal drug trade. This is one of the argument. But however, if you look at the Canada, there the cannabis supply became more from the black market under the underworld. That means the legalized cannabis supplier were unable to meet the demand of the cannabis requirement. The underworld flourished under the recreational legalization. Legalization allows for the implementation of educational programs, public about the responsible use and potential risk, harm reduction strategies. This can be contributed to the safer usage patterns. That's how the consumer education can be improved. But however, on the other hand, by legalizing the cannabis, you are sending a different message. That means it is not harmful, it can be used by anybody, and it is allowed in the society. That means people may consume cannabis and drive, and cannabis and alcohol be a deadly combination. They may become potentially violent. With regard to public health risks, the critics have argued cannabis use can have an adverse health impact on children, adolescent, and pregnant women. Cannabis can also cause dependence, emotivational syndrome, and adverse impact on cognition. In this regard, an important article published by Maria Athanasio and her colleagues in 2023. This study was published in Frontiers in Psychiatry. The title of the study is The Clouded Debate, a systematic review of comparative longitudinal studies examining the impact of recreational cannabis legalization on key public health outcomes. This study, based upon the inclusion and exclusion criteria, 32 studies were included. What are the results? Results was astonishing. In the past 1 month, with regard to legalization, there is a phenomenal increase in cannabis use in adults, that is, adults with 26 years and above. Further, preliminary indications with increasing trend with regard to hospitalization, emergency visit after cannabis use, cannabis poisoning, and also increase in vehicular traffic, accidents, and fatalities in cannabis users. Further, preliminary studies also indicated potential increase in violence in cannabis use. Further, increased criminal activity in cannabis users. However, the only positive finding was there was a decline in opioid quantity use in the society. Now let's look into cannabis and psychiatric disorder. In this regard, an important study published by Hassan and colleagues in 2020. The title of the study is Cannabis Use and Psychosis, a review of reviews. This study was published in European Archives of Psychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences. Here, the authors conducted a systematic review of meta-analysis to evaluate the impact of cannabis use on the onset and course of psychosis. The authors did a systematic review of 5 databases between 2005 and 2016, which yielded 26 systematic review and meta-analysis. These are the various studies which were included in this review. Now let's look into the results. The results clearly indicated psychotic illness arises more frequently in cannabis user when compared to non-users. Cannabis use is associated with dose dependent of developing psychotic illness in users. Cannabis users have an earlier onset of psychotic illness compared to non-users. Cannabis use was also associated with increased relapse rate, more hospitalization, pronounced positive symptoms in patients with schizophrenia and other psychotic illness. Cannabis use in a psychiatric patient can cause poor prognosis, poor outcome, and chronic course. Cannabis causes dependence without any doubt. Chronic cannabis can also cause amotivational syndrome. These are the various findings from this study. Now the question is, can this recreational use worsen or increase the psychosis? In this regard, Elser and his colleagues published a study in JAMA Network. The title of the study was State Cannabis Legalization and Psychosis Related Healthcare Utilization. This was published in 2023. Here, the authors wanted to evaluate the association of state medical and recreational cannabis laws and commercialization with rates of psychosis related healthcare utilization. This was a retrospective cohort design using state level panel fixed effect of model within state changes in the monthly rates of psychosis related healthcare claims as a function of state cannabis policy level, adjusting for time, varying state level characteristics, and state year and month fixed effects. In simple terms, was there any increase in health related claim with regard to cannabis health psychosis? Was the main objective of the studies. However, this study concluded there was no sudden spurt of increase in cannabis-related psychosis. Recreational cannabis policies were not associated with statistically significant increase in the rate of psychosis. This was a negative study. But however, the studies with regard to acute poisoning of cannabis was noted. Alaf and his colleagues published a study in 2023 in a journal of addiction. The title of the study was The Impact of Cannabis Legalization and Decriminalization on Acute Poisoning. A systematic review was done, and this study was published recently. This study included 30 studies which met the inclusion criteria. The study used the data from United States, Canada, and Thailand. Studies examined the legalization of medicinal cannabis, that is 14 studies. Decriminalization of legalization of recreational cannabis use was 21. Here the researcher aimed to examine the effect of cannabis legalization, decriminalization, and acute poisoning. This study concluded that medicinal or recreational cannabis legalization is associated with increased cannabis poisoning in adults, adolescents, and children. The reason attributed under the study was, since it was legalized for recreational use, changed the attitude of the public. They thought that cannabis is healthy, cannabis has a low risk, cannabis does not cause any dependence, and hence people started using cannabis widely and without any limitation. This caused cannabis poisoning, especially in young population. Now we will look into criminal justice and social equity for cannabis recreational legalization. There has been an argument, by legalizing the recreational use, we can reduce the burden of criminal justice system by decreasing the number of arrest and incarceration with related to cannabis. Of course, this looks very interesting because the number of arrests with regard to cannabis use, cannabis selling, cannabis trafficking causes a huge burden on the criminal justice system. Can this be an argument? Because the number of cases are too much, let's legalize it. Can it be an argument? With regard to social equity, there are studies which clearly said that the people from particular race, particular community, from lower socio-economic background were arrested and punished. That means the cannabis causes social inequity when we do not legalize it. Can this be again a argument? With regard to economic impact of cannabis recreational use legalization, the cannabis industry can potentially increase the revenue of the government. Legalization can create jobs, can stimulate economic growth, contribute both to local and national economic through taxation of cannabis sales. But the studies from cannabis in Canada is conflicting. The studies have clearly said that by legalization, the tax from the cannabis sale did not increase significantly. However, the people who are selling cannabis in the black market, under the underworld, they were able to strengthen their supply. Even the quality of cannabis supplied by them was very good and cheaper than the government approved ones. That means the economic impact which was argued for legalization did not hold good. The crime and black market flourished when it was legalized. The simple reason is the supply and demand market was unable to fulfill by legalization from the government. The black market, which is already existing, who have a very good networking, they do not wait for the permission from the government. They were able to supply seamlessly in Canada. Now, there is an argument from the individual liberty and personal choice. Various people argue that we need to have a personal choice whether to use cannabis or not. Legalization is seen as a way to enhance individual liberty and personal choice. Of course, the individual liberty and personal choice looks very attractive when cannabis use improves the individual, family, members, and public at large. However, if you look at the fundamental rights, under the Constitution of India, imposes reasonable restriction. That means NDPS Act allows for medicinal use and scientific purposes. If you look at the workplace, various studies have raised concerns the impact of cannabis use in workplace, not only the economic and safety impact. The critics worry the employees under the influence of cannabis may pose a risk to themselves and to others. Not only that, there are studies, especially in call centers. The employer used to supply cannabis so that they can sit and work for long duration. That means tomorrow, cannabis can become a reinforcer for long time work. Is it ethical? Is a question we need to ask. Now let's look into the legalization of recreational cannabis use and drivers. There was an important publication by Bruchar and his colleagues in 2022, and this study was published in New England Journal of Medicine. The title of the study is Cannabis Legalization and Detection of Tetrahydrocannabinol in Injured Drivers. The background of the study is the effect of cannabis legalization in Canada, that is in October 2018, on the prevalence of injured drivers testing positive for THC is unclear, and they wanted to know how many people were met with an accident and what is the cannabis level in their blood. They looked into 5,699 injured drivers and looked for their blood with regard to cannabis. They included various inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. In that, 4,409 met the criteria for study. If you look at that, 3,550 before cannabis legalization, 70 during the month of legalization, 789 after legalization, were the numbers included under the accident. The results. Before legalization, the THC level was detected in 325 out of the 3,550 drivers, that is 9.2%. After legalization, this number from 9.2% increased to 17.9%. That means THC was detected in 141 of the 789. That means, my dear friends, legalization increased the use of cannabis in drivers. If you look at this clear cut, the chart clearly says the graph of cannabis legalization suddenly shot up the green usage, that is, usage of cannabis. If you look at the THC level, more than 0 nanogram per ml showed highest spike. With regard to 2 nanogram also increased, and also 5 nanogram also increased. That means by legalizing cannabis, it will have a serious impact on the drivers. They believe that cannabis is safe and they use this cannabis under the intoxication they will drive. And invariably, they will meet with an accident. Hence, the author concluded, after cannabis legalization, the prevalence of moderately injured driver with a THC level of at least 2 nanogram per milliliter in participating British Columbia trauma center doubled. That means legalization can have an impact on drivers. Further, the impact of legalization of recreational cannabis use in USA children and adolescent population. Here, this study, the critic worried that legalization may increase the access of cannabis use in children and adolescent. This may have an impact on the developing brain because cannabis can have impact on the brain which is growing. This can have a negative impact. This can cause addiction. This can cause cognitive impairment. There has been a theory called as gateway drug theory. Some researchers argue legalizing the cannabis use for recreational purpose can act as a gateway drug for many other drugs. That means this is a opening gate for hardcore drugs. That means the children and adolescent may experiment with cannabis now and they may go on for hardcore drugs. In this regard, there is a study published by many scientist colleagues in addictive behavior. The title of the study is Recreational Cannabis Legalization Alters the Association Among Cannabis Use, Perception of Risk, and Cannabis Use Disorder Treatment for adolescent and young adults. The results clearly said that adolescent and young adults' cannabis use prevalence increased after legalization. Among both adolescent and young adults, the association of low perception of risks of harm with higher cannabis use was prevalent. That means people thought that the government has legalized the recreational use. That means it is healthier. Further, among adolescent, the association of low perception of risk of harm with cannabis use decreased, and further, help-seeking behavior also decreased. Further, the people did not come for even addiction treatment. So, my dear friends, just because you legalize the recreational use, that doesn't mean the people will come for addiction treatment. What about the polyuse of substance? Many a time, various studies have said that the cannabis use along with alcohol, opioid, and many other substances is increasing. That means it becomes difficult to treat. There is a study done by Kim and his colleagues in 2021, and it was published in Drug and Alcohol Dependence. Here, the impact of state level cannabis legalization on polyuse of alcohol and cannabis in United States from 2004 to 2017. The public and restricted use data from 2004 and 2017, a national survey on drug use and health were analyzed. Data on post-birth cannabis and alcohol use were also analyzed. Cannabis legalization was determined by the presence or absence of medical marijuana laws and recreational marijuana laws in each state. Legalization of cannabis was associated with increase in cannabis and alcohol use. So, my dear friends, the people will not only take alcohol, they will also consume cannabis along with this. This can be a deadly combination. Now, let's look at the Canadian experience on legalization of cannabis for recreational use. Hall and his colleagues published a study in addiction in 2023. The title of the study is The Implementation and Public Health Impact of Cannabis Legalization in Canada, a systematic review. In this, they clearly analyzed cannabis-related arrest. A substantial reduction has occurred because if you legalize cannabis, that means there will be no arrest. What about the availability of the potency of cannabis? The potency of the cannabis, that means high quality, high potency cannabis was available more in the market. That means the government was unable to regulate it. Legal cannabis price. That means there was a substantial fall in the cannabis price. The government was selling, but the underworld and black market reduced the price. There was an increase in the availability of cannabis. Further, adult cannabis use increased modestly in the population, my dear friends. Is it required? Cannabis use in adolescent. There is a mixed result. That means adolescent thought that it is legalized. Some of the study it is said that it is increased. Some of the studies said it did not increase. Daily cannabis use, there is no findings with regard to this. Cannabis use and drivers. The studies clearly said, some of the studies said that it increases the crash accidents. Some of the studies said no. Acute cannabis poisoning. In this regard, various studies clearly said that there is a substantial increase in cannabis poisoning and visiting the emergency department. Further, it also increased the cannabis poisoning in children. Do we require this? Adult psychiatric presentation, invariably cannabis use, increase the behavioral problem and also psychiatric presentation. What about the normalization and social cost? Few researchers have raised concerns that legalizing cannabis may normalize the use. That means people will think low threat perception. That means cannabis does not cause any health hazard. And cannabis use can increase phenomenally in the population. They may refuse to seek help, telling that it is legalized, why should I take treatment? It can potentially lead to increased social costs by healthcare utilization, treatment program, and societal impact, especially cannabis poisoning, and also people with psychiatric illness, if they use cannabis, can cause chronic course and poor outcome. The long term effect of cannabis, especially in various children and adolescent population, is not understood at this point of time. However, we know that cannabis can cause dependence, can cause emotivational syndrome, can cause cognitive impairment, and in combination with other drugs, it is very difficult to treat. We do not know the long term social consequences. Critics have contended that full social consequences of widespread cannabis legalization is not entirely predictable. They worry about the potential unintended consequences of cannabis use in the society. There are preliminary studies have clearly said that if a pregnant woman is using cannabis to decrease her anxiety, her worry, or dysphoric effect, of course, cannabis decreases the anxiety, but this has a detrimental effect on the children who will be born. This cannabis can reduces the immune placental transcriptome network. Hence, the children who will be born will have increased anxiety and increased hyperactivity. To conclude, my dear friends, India's population is young. 45% of them are below 18. Should we legalize the recreational use of cannabis and expose our young population for cannabis? Should we take this risk? Our country is not ready. Our country is considering our education, literacy, and cutthroat commercialization can be a disaster for our young population. Hence, my dear friends, we need to think 100 times before we legalize cannabis for recreational use. There are many points against legalization for recreational use. There are many points also to say that cannabis is useful for medicinal purpose. Yes, of course it is useful. Hence, under NDPS Act, for medicinal and for scientific purposes, it is allowed. At this point of time, we need to decriminalize the cannabis use so that the people can go for treatment. Access to treatment should be made available in every district hospital. We need to open de-addiction centers for drug users. We need to decriminalize the drug usage. Within next 1 or 2 decades, there is an impending drug abuse epidemic in our country. We need to prepare the battle against this drug abuse and drug addiction. We should not legalize the recreational cannabis use, my dear friends. So final verdict is, at this point of time, we need to decriminalize the drug usage. We need to facilitate the treatment. We need to reduce the stigma on the people who are using drugs. We need to have an inclusive policy and engage them in treatment. Cannabis use, both for medicinal and scientific purposes, is allowed under the NDPS Act of 1985. The only thing we should do is decriminalize the drug usage and facilitate treatment. With regard to legalizing the recreational use of cannabis, should not be done at this point of time. This can be a disaster for our population at this point of time, my dear friends. This is my personal opinion. We need to reconsider the decision with regard to legalizing for recreational cannabis use after maybe 10 or 20 years down the line. So, we have a larger battle to play. We need to control the epidemic of drug usage in India. We need to prepare for that battle, not to legalize the recreational use of cannabis. Thank you very much for your valuable time. Stay safe. Say no to drugs.